Thank you, Mr. President. A lot of good discussion on the floor today. I will join with my colleague from California in urging that the House also move on the transportation bill, but that's not why I'm rising here this afternoon. I would like to speak on the legislation that is before us. This is the Menendez proposal to raise taxes on American energy companies and I think inevitably prices to American consumers. It has been described as something else, but I would suggest to you that any effort to increase the taxes on the energy companies that are providing a resource to us is nothing more than a tax on our energy companies. And as we tax those energy companies, it's sure not going to make them produce things that are more affordable, more abundant. In fact, it will have the resulting effect to impact negatively prices to American consumers. This legislation that we've got before us, this is not a new idea. This is something that we have seen before. I think the numerous times that we have rejected it leads me to the conclusion that it still remains a bad idea. It's a messaging bill that has failed over and over and over, and I think it deserves to see that same fate again. This very Congress, just a little less than a year ago, rejected the same tax hikes. Anybody who's curious as to see what it is that we did back then just needs to look up vote number 72. This was back in May of last year, just to see how all 100 members of the Senate voted. Now, some have accused Republicans as using this opportunity when gas prices are high to push our cause, if you will, to push our cause for increased supply, and that somehow or other we welcome the aspect of higher gasoline prices. And it was actually the President himself who said that some see a political opportunity to call for greater domestic energy production. And with oil sitting at over $100 a barrel, I think we all recognize that there is impact out there. But I can tell you for a fact, Mr. President, that my constituents don't view this as a political opportunity. I get a weekly summary of what's happening with gas prices around my state right now. The average price of a gallon of unleaded here in the U.S. is just a little shy of $4. Well, in my hometown in Anchorage, we're paying $4.14. In Juneau, which is our state capital, we're paying $4.24. In Barrow, top of the world they're at $5.75. Bethel is paying $6.33. They long for the day that they would be paying closer to $4. We are so far beyond the national average. They don't view higher gasoline prices as any kind of a political opportunity. What they are asking for is that they do more. In fact, there is an imperative that we here in Congress do more to address prices. And I believe that there is no question that we can bring additional resources online, that we can bring several million additional barrels of American resources to market. And there's no question but what it would do. It's going to help to create jobs. We know that for a fact. It will absolutely generate revenues. It will better insulate our nation from the instability that we have with the global price markets. And we know that's what's happening right now. Every time Iran is mentioned, everything gets a little shaky out there. And we know that so much of this is due, in fact, to the fact that there is little spare capacity in the global markets. So let's look closer to home. What do we have closer to home? The President has suggested time and time again that we've only got 2% of the world's reserves. Well, in fact, this myth about the U.S. scarcity is just exactly that. When we talk about proven reserves, in fact, it is a much smaller piece of the pie, 20.6 billion barrels of proved reserves. But what needs to be understood, and unfortunately it doesn't make a good bumper sticker, is that what we have as a nation demonstrates incredible national reserves, 205.6 billion barrels of technically recoverable resources. We don't even count the 800+ billion barrels of oil shale that are out there. So you might ask the question, well, why are we not going after the rest of the pyramid, the point in blue? And the problem that we're facing is that so much of this is put off limits. It's not accessible, and it's not accessible because of our government policies. Now, I recognize that there is more to a policy when it comes to an energy policy than just drilling, just increased domestic production. But it must be part of the solution, and it must be a significant part of the solution if we're going to talk about true North American energy independence. We must do more when it comes to conservation and efficiency. We need to build out toward the renewable energy sources of the future. If you want to have the bumper sticker, it's find more, use less. It's pretty simple. And the chart lets us know that we truly can find more here. But what we're facing with the Menendez bill that's in front of us takes us in a completely different direction. What the President and the Democratic leadership are proposing cannot, by its own definition, reduce our gas prices. If anything, we're just going to see them pushed higher. And my constituents back home just can't afford to see them pushed higher when you're paying above $5, above $6 per gallon at the pump. We know that some pretty basic economic principles are at play here. Taxing something does not make it cheaper and more abundant. And we know from past experience, due to a failed experiment with a windfall profits tax that harmed domestic oil production, collected far fewer revenues than was expected, we know that this has taken us in the wrong direction. Now, again, our problem is high fuel prices and their effect on average Americans. I have yet to hear anyone explain to me how raising taxes is going to lower prices. And even when you look at the subsidies that are extended in the Menendez bill, not even half of these are related to the transportation fuels. The first section here in his bill is extension of credit for energy-efficient existing homes. Well, I'm all for that, but tell me how this ties in somehow or other to our transportation fuels. In terms of costs, it's even more unbalanced. So I'm left at a loss here to understand how permanent tax increases for oil and gas producers in exchange for another year of subsidies for efficiency and renewable energy is going to make any kind of a reasonable or meaningful difference. It kind of says to the American people, well, that $4 that you're paying at the pump, too bad about that, but how about a government-subsidized dishwasher? That just doesn't work. Now, some will also come here to argue that increasing taxes will have no effect on production. And in response to that, I'd like to submit 2 news stories from last week for the record. These are news stories. These aren't editorials. One is from Platts Energy. The other is from the Wall Street Journal. And both detail an announcement from the British government that it is going to reverse its own taxes on the oil companies. Last year, England decided to do essentially what is being proposed here with the Menendez bill. They were responding to high oil prices, and so what they did is they moved to increase taxes on the industry. Well, the result, Mr. President, is not going to come as a surprise. When the government made it less economical to produce oil by hiking their tax rates, companies stopped producing and they were making their investments elsewhere. In the year since Great Britain imposed its tax hikes, its production decline has tripled from 6% to 18%. Now let me just repeat that. In the year since Great Britain imposed tax increases on oil producers, production declines accelerated from 6% a year to 18% a year. And now Britain is in process of doing absolutely an about-face. They're likely going to offer $5.5 billion in tax relief to the oil companies to try to bring the production back. Now, I'm sure that some here would refer to that tax cut as a subsidy and ignore the inconvenient fact that higher tax levels lead to lower production. They don't lead to cheaper fuel, they lead to lower production. And yet, even in the face of high fuel prices and compelling empirical evidence, the proposal in front of us is going to take us down the exact same path that Great Britain went down last year. It would make the clear mistake of driving production away when I think we need it most. The outcome in England just helps prove that this is a seriously defective idea and I think a dangerous one. So you just need to look at what has happened across the pond there. If the Senate was really serious about addressing gasoline prices, we'd be taking the long overdue steps.
The senator has consumed 10 minutes.
Mr. President, I don't see anyone in the queue. If I may have another minute to wrap up.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. If we were really serious here about what we're doing in terms of increasing our long overdue requirement to up our oil resources, our oil production and supply, we know. We've got opportunities from our neighbors to the north in Canada with the Keystone Pipeline. We clearly have opportunities in Alaska from the outer continental shelf, from the Rocky Mountain West. We still import about half of our oil supply, and about half of that is from OPEC. And one last chart, Mr. President, if I may. Right now, about 47% is OPEC, non-OPEC is 53%. If we were to add to our mix here in this country what we could get from Keystone, that's the middle pie. But look where we would be as a nation if we were to plus up our activity with domestic production, bring on Keystone, and with our existing resources, our imports from OPEC are reduced to such a minimal amount. We talk about energy independence, North American energy independence, and we truly could be in that position where we are not vulnerable to the volatility of the markets, not vulnerable to the volatility that comes from OPEC setting the prices as they do, not in a situation where we are spending millions and billions of dollars to import a resource that we need but that we have as a nation. I can't fathom why the Congress would want to drain our economy by raising taxes on the very businesses that help minimize our foreign dependence, help create good-paying jobs for our families, and truly help to make a difference to Americans around the country in the long run. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.